Recently, there's been a push by Malaysia with the backing of China to reinvent an old idea, that is the Asian Monetary Fund. In this video, we'll take a closer look at what are the driving forces behind the idea to reinvent the Asian Monetary Fund, what are the challenges, what are the opportunities, how can you position yourself to benefit from this. Aaron here from Offshore in Asia. So if you're interested in moving out to Asia, doing business in Asia, creating a life out here, well, we can help you to make that happen. So the idea of the Asian Monetary Fund was first put forward in 1997 by Japan, and this was in the midst of the Asian financial crisis. The whole idea was that this new monetary fund would help these countries embroiled in the Asian financial crisis to dig their way out of that, but to also protect against future crises. At the time, countries in Southeast Asia were having issues dealing with the IMF. Indonesia, South Korea, and Thailand had all turned towards the International Monetary Fund and asked them for a bailout. But a bailout came with very stringent conditions attached. There were issues with currencies as well. At the time, the Thai baht and the Indonesian rupiah were pegged to the US dollar. In the end, the US didn't support the creation of the Asian Monetary Fund. They wanted power to stay in the West with the World Bank and the IMF, and the Asian Monetary Fund was never to be. One of the main factors that is behind the push to create the Asian Monetary Fund is the de-dollarization trend. For a long time, the US dollar has been the reserve currency of the world, and a lot of the financial architecture is centered around the US and the West. As a result of this, many loans that are made, cross-border loans, currencies that have to be bought to buy commodities, the vast majority of that trade is done in US dollars. And that means a lot of countries hold loans, have debt in US dollars. Now, if you're an emerging country or a developing country, holding USD denominated debt can be a big risk. It can't be avoided in many cases. Trading in US dollars is a fact of life. But when the Federal Reserve in the US is hiking rates at a faster clip than many other countries in the world, and the USD has that safe haven status, so in times of global volatility, a lot of money flows towards the US and gets parked in USD just because it's seen as a safer place to put your money. But all of these things lead to the appreciation of the US dollar. So if you're a country in Asia or anywhere and you have big USD denominated loans and the USD is appreciating faster than your local currency is appreciating, that means it makes it harder to repay your loans because your local currency is now worth less compared to the US dollar. And in an extreme situation, this is the kind of thing that can bankrupt a country if their local currency gets depreciated to such a low point that they just can't repay their USD denominated loans. And of course, with interest rates being quite high in the US, you're getting hit on that end as well. You can't print your way out of it, not like the US can, because the more you print your local currency, the more you devalue your currency. The value of it goes down, it buys less of the USD. You don't have that advantage that the US has of being able to print the world's reserve currency, so this requires a higher level of financial management, which really isn't a bad thing in that sense. These have been the rules of international finance for a long time. They might not be fair, they are definitely stacked in the US's favor, but this has been the way things have worked in the past. Another big factor behind the de-dollarization push is the weaponization of the financial system by the US. When the US pulled out of Afghanistan, they also froze Afghanistan's reserves, their gold reserves that were held in New York. And of course, the US froze Russian reserves when they invaded Ukraine, and they locked them out of the SWIFT system. That made it very hard for Russia to send money across borders to pay for commodities and things like that. With the US using the financial system that they are the architects of as a weapon, essentially, this makes other countries nervous, especially countries that aren't in the G7 club. They wonder, what if we do something that the US doesn't like? Are they going to cut us off? Are they going to freeze our reserves? It's a legitimate concern, especially for countries that aren't chummy with the US. There is a view in the international community that the US has overplayed its hand here, that it's crossed a line. There is a loss in trust of the US, and there is a bit of a view that they are using this financial system that they control to bully other countries into doing what they want. Of course, if there is a concern by countries that the US might potentially use a financial system against them in the future, every country needs to have its own financial security for the good of its people, and if they believe that they cannot trust the US, then they're going to look for a workaround. They're going to look for other options. So recently, there was a push from Malaysian Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim. He wants to revive the idea of the Asian Monetary Fund. He wants Asia to be more reliant on itself and less reliant on the US and the US dollar. So Anwar presented the idea to China President Xi Jinping, and not surprisingly, Xi Jinping is quite receptive to the idea. China, in its role with the BRICS group, is already planning moves to take some financial control away from the US. They want to have a more Asian-centric financial system, and the introduction of an Asian monetary fund would tick that box for them. Malaysia and India have also recently announced that they are going to allow cross-border trade to be settled in rupees or ringgits. If you are China or a country in Southeast Asia, the idea of the Asian monetary fund might be a nice idea, but how viable is it? Well, as I mentioned at the top of the video, the idea is an old idea, but it fell over. It couldn't get support back in the day, back in 1997. The United States didn't want it to happen, but things have changed a lot in the last 25 years. China is now the second largest economy in the world. It probably will be the largest economy at some point. India, which is part of Asia, is the 5th largest economy in the world, and they are on a rapid rise as well. So you'd probably have to say that the Asian Monetary Fund would be a lot more viable now than it was back in 1997. There is more impetus and more incentive than ever to move away from a US-dominated system. China already has the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. This is what has bankrolled a lot of the Belt and Road Initiative, and the introduction of an Asian Monetary Fund would round things out quite nicely for China in that respect. The introduction of an Asian Monetary Fund would create an Asia-focused response to the IMF, which is seen as being a West-favoured institution. Now, creating a new monetary fund such as this is easier said than done, and it's not without its challenges. Indonesia has expressed concern as to the viability of a new fund. There is an argument that it may be hard to get ASEAN countries to all agree on a new fund, let alone get all the ASEAN countries to financially contribute to a fund. And there is a risk that a new fund could turn out to be predominantly controlled by China. And then countries in Southeast Asia, the smaller countries, have to ask themselves, well, are they just swapping out being controlled by the US to being controlled by China? Do they really want that? Do they want to mix things up? Maybe they're happy with the status quo to some degree. And at the end of the day, it may be very hard to get backing for a new fund without the blessing and support and the involvement of the United States. Whether China likes it or not, if you had the US on board, it may be a lot easier. It's probably not how China would want it to be, but the US might want to be involved, and there might be other countries who have closer ties to the US who are based in Asia that might want the US involved as well. Okay, so if there is an introduction of an Asian monetary fund, what are the opportunities that are associated with that? Well, Asia in comparison to the rest of the world, it's on the ascent. You've got China, you've got India that is growing at breakneck speed. You've got other large economies like Indonesia, Thailand, South Korea, Japan, of course. None of these countries can be ignored. There probably will be some ups and downs in the rise of Asia, but the long-term trend is clear here. Asia is on the rise now, and they want a seat at the international table. So what can you do to benefit from this? Well, you can invest in Asian equities. You can invest or hold money in Asian currencies. The Thai baht, for one example, has appreciated by around 10% on the Australian dollar since July last year. You can buy real estate in Asia. There's some big global cities in Asia that would stand to benefit from a more Asian-centric financial system. Other industries would feed off this trend as well, so going into business in the Asian region wouldn't be a crazy idea if you wanted to leverage some of that Asian growth. And whenever there is a bit of a currency reset, a new way of doing things, gold is a natural beneficiary of that. So if you're concerned about some short-term instability or how a new monetary fund in Asia would be backed, having some money in gold could help you weather any short-term instability, but also benefit from any currency or monetary reset that might pull power away from the USD and into other currencies. Now, if you're interested in investing in any of these kinds of things I've just mentioned, whether it be gold, real estate, business, currencies, equities in Asia, we can help you to do that. So head over to offshoreinasia.com and you can get in contact with us from there. All right, so wrapping up the video here, guys, and summarizing some of the main points. The introduction of an Asian monetary fund isn't without its challenges, but there are obvious opportunities as well. There is a big push from the de-dollarization to take control away from the United States, the loss of trust in the US. All of these factors are driving the push to create an Asian monetary fund. It might take some time to implement, but the introduction of an Asian monetary fund could play a pivotal role in moving the financial center of the world away from the West further to the east. The US isn't going anywhere, neither is Europe, neither is the UK, but you can't deny that there is a big push from BRICS and other countries that want to take some financial power away from the US. You've got China on the rise, India on the rise. They want to do business more in their backyard and not be controlled by someone on the other side of the world. A less US-centric world is the result of that. They want to run their own affairs. They want their own financial infrastructure. They don't want a financial system that can be used against them if they do something that another country doesn't like. For all these reasons, I would think that the whole de-dollarization and the push to create more Asia-centric financial institutions, this trend will continue. So then it's up to you, the individual, to position yourself in such a way as to capitalize on this longer term trend.